Welcome everyone to the first ever writing contest reading. It really brings me great joy to gather here today to celebrate student writing. Please, while you're sitting, enjoy some excellent hot chocolate is a fun way to say it too, some cookies, and then my personal favorite, some hot chocolate Hershey Kisses in the very front. Also at our front table, you will find samples of all of the finalists' work and the winning submission as well. So exciting. So please look through those. They're my personal copies, so you will see my notes, which might be fun too. But although we're gathered here in the Little Theater, today we bring to you some big voices and some great stories. I want you to know that the main purpose of this contest and this reading is to celebrate student writing in all forms. Additionally, I hope to show students that writing actually can be fun, despite what they think, and that you can even be paid for writing. Occasionally, sometimes, maybe not always 100. As always, we strive to create a sense of community in the Writing Center, and this contest also introduced us to new student writers that we hadn't met before. In fact, the winner and one of our finalists will be new peer writing tutors in the Writing Center in the spring. Speaking of peer tutors, I wanted to use this opportunity to extend a very warm welcome to all of our new peer tutors who will be starting in the spring semester. For the Writing Center, we have hired our winner of the writing contest, Brennan Salter, a sophomore psych major, George Rosatone in the back, one of our finalists, who is a sophomore creative writing major, Pat Whalen in the third row right here, who is a senior poli-sci major. Hang on, we'll just go to the right. And so then Kayla Clifford, who is next to Pat, who is a first-year English major, and Annika Roy, who is our sophomore marketing comm major with a minor in graphic design. Great. In the tutoring center, we are welcoming Lexi Gellerman, accounting, Jordan Perez, nursing, Matt Barabee, exercise science, and I'm not sure how to pronounce this, so forgive me, but Lauren Maciazek, finance and accounting. Welcome to all of you. As many of you may already know, many reputable magazines and literary journals host writing contests to highlight new writers' work. Colleges and universities started following this lead across the nation, holding contests to encourage healthy competition among peers, as writing and publishing, in fact, are very competitive fields. Today, our writing contest illuminates the very strong student voices and stories we have here at Endicott. For this writing contest, we had over 20 submissions. The 3 writing peer tutors who serve on our executive board, one of whom is here today, as well as all of the professional writing tutors, vetted these submissions. Out of all those submissions, 7 pieces were chosen as finalists. Can you just vet some of them now? We hope to narrow it down to 5 finalists, but we just couldn't, showing you really the strength of this work. There's a flash fiction piece, a horror story, a poem, and even an analytical essay among these. Allison Muse, our Dean of Academic Success, was selected as the contest judge, tasked with reading all 7 entries and selecting the winner. Within hours of being named the judge and receiving all of the pieces, again, within hours, Allison chose Brennan Salter's I Can't Chew Tobacco Anymore as the winner. In conversation, Allison said to me, "The writing was so mature. Brennan's piece beautifully and believably depicts a young man at war. The story feels true, even in its brevity. Brennan was the only writer who included an author's note at the end, as well as relevant information, translations, and accompanying pictures." Allow me to read exactly what Allison Muse wrote for selecting the piece. "I chose I Can't Chew Tobacco Anymore for several reasons. Really, it had me on the first lines, which are song lyrics. My dad, who is one of the most important people in my life, listens to oldies all the time, and this song comes on constantly. So the story already reminded me of my father before I got to the second paragraph. My father served in the Army and often speaks of his time abroad and the experiences that he had. He was not on active duty during a war, but he talks about the living conditions, the food, being away from home, and all the things that come with an Army life. More than reminding me of my father and how much I loved listening to his stories and imagining his whole life he had before I was even thought of, the story had great details. I found myself imagining what it would be like to be in Vietnam. The details helped me to vividly picture the surroundings. And lastly, I know exactly what it is like to be unable to eat, smell, or even hear something without memories flooding in and taking over. Allison later adds, to provide insight into why the story was chosen, it brings awareness to a topic that many are unfamiliar with. The end of the piece was not only impressive, but thoughtful. Professional writing tutor Kate Victoria Hanassian, who has been a longtime editor and publisher, called the work extremely vivid. Lauren Bedard, one of the members of our executive board and a peer writing tutor here at the Writing Center, wrote, "It is a creative take on a very difficult topic. I wish I could have written it." Brennan, as I mentioned, is a sophomore psychology major starting in the Writing Center next semester. Please join me in welcoming him.
Hello, everybody. Can everybody hear me like this?
Yeah.
This is good? My glasses on. Thank you, Casey, for the introduction. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Allison, for selecting me. This is an awesome opportunity. So my story is called I Can't Chew Tobacco Anymore. And you already gave some background, so I'm just going to get into it. Van Morrison woke me up today, although he didn't know it. Laughing and a running, skipping and a jumping. In the misty morning fog with our hearts a-thumpin', and you slant-eyed Charlie, I sing to myself as I hit the radio, turning it off. I'm not racist like my father, but it is hard to respect the man shooting at you from a tree. Music isn't enjoyable nowadays. Skipping with a thumping heart once meant running through the redwoods with my girlfriend, Jane. Now it means dodging bullets in the jungle. Allow me to digress. My mother raised me to be a lover, not a fighter, yet there I stood in Vietnam fighting someone else's war. Shoot, reload, shoot, reload. That cycle was muscle memory by the time I turned 19. Oh, how different my 19th birthday was, spent cheerlessly in a tent that was no match for the rain season of Vietnam. My 18th birthday was well spent smoking joints with my girlfriend Jane. Hippies, we called ourselves. She would be disgusted if she knew what I'd done in the past 12 months. Baby killer, she'd call me, baby killer. I often hear those words ring throughout my head as I execute unfathomable orders. I wonder if those back in California would still love me if they knew what we were doing here. As I glide off the edge of my cot, I stand up and listen to my back crack 1,000 times. My spine is like a log, slowly deteriorating in the Vietnam rain. Now that I consider it, that is exactly what it is. I haven't made it to the foot of the hub before Lieutenant Salvisky approaches, ordering me to light a cigarette. What a demanding bastard he is, sadistic in a sense. He really gets off on making my life difficult, tormenting me at times. Whatever butters his bread, I guess. As I move my lighter towards his cigarette, I pray that it will explode in his face. I'm not sure why I thought praying would do anything. I prayed that I'd never be drafted, yet here I am, lighting cigarettes for Salvisky in the country of yellow men. I curse him out as he takes a long drag, blowing the smoke in my face. Making my way to the most dreadful breakfast you could imagine, I pack my lower left lip with Copenhagen long cut. It's smokeless, so it must be healthier. I grab a spoon and eat the same pile of mush that I've eaten every day for the past 3 months. Oatmeal, raisins, and cinnamon. The trifecta has plenty of sugar to keep me on edge, as if I'm not anxious enough. It's comical, really, how commanders think soldiers may doze off in combat. Hell, I can't even sleep at night. As I lift my spoon to my mouth, the ground beneath Lieutenant Salvisky and I begins to rumble. Salvisky immediately drops his cigarette. Now, for someone as addicted to tobacco as Salvisky is, to drop a perfectly smokable cigarette, this rumble must be serious. Grabbing my M14 and a box of Winchester .308 ammunition, I look to the sky to see a plume of black smoke. The smoke has a stench like no other, so incredibly thick you taste it on your tongue whether you want to or not. I froze as it floated toward the heavens, probably taking a few souls with it. As my eyes returned to the ground level, I am met with a fiery hell. Where once stood trees lay burnt out, blackened stumps. Where once stood men lay burnt piles of flesh, a barbecue gone horribly wrong. With my ears ringing like a doorbell, I make out Vietnamese screams. Giet Chung Di, Giet Chung Di. Glimpsing to my left, I see a unit of Vietnamese soldiers taking aim at me. With a bang louder than thunder, several rounds soar by me, annihilating trees and other men. I duck under a log, hoisting my rifle over the thick bark and pulling the trigger without looking. I hear men falling, screaming, probably begging. With a brief prayer to the God I don't believe in, I lift my head from under the log to see the destruction that I had contributed to. I had not just killed men, I killed fathers, brothers, and sons. I destroyed families. Despite the horror, I find myself unable to show mercy as they would not surrender. Tiep Tuc Ban, the Vietnamese soldiers chanted. As the taste of tobacco fills my mouth, I reload in preparation to sin yet again. With a heavy heart, I open fire into the jungle, not allowing myself to think about their families. They're targets, I tell myself, they're just targets. The barrel of my rifle is hot, red as the devil's tongue, indicating that my work is done. As my barrel smokes like a chimney, I glance downward, noticing a pool of red liquid beneath me. My tongue begins to stiffen and my palms turn clammy. With each second, my hearing fades. With each blink, my vision darkens. The last thing on my mind is California. I regain consciousness as the blades of a medevac blow my hair backward. 4 men whom I've never seen before lift my stretcher over the guard and into a seating area. The pilot turns up the radio as the soldiers light cigarettes. Time passes, and as the chopper ascends, I admire the palm trees, at least those that remain. A blessing it is. The helicopter flight had been the most peaceful moment in the past 12 months. The medevac lands at a U.S. base in Cambodia. After being transported to the hospital, I lay in my cot, and Lieutenant Salvisky enters, removing his glasses. Shrapnel. It was shrapnel, he says. Huh? I reply. An explosion 50 yards behind you sent shrapnel into your back. You're quite lucky it didn't catch a lung. Salvisky chops it up to luck, but I can't imagine why I'd been so lucky. I had stolen, tortured, and killed, yet I remained 6 feet above ground. A Cambodian nurse enters, speaking quickly. Ban Kao Kat Viet Chu, she says. There is a silent pause as I have no clue what she is saying. Ben Kot Dao Giet Chu, she repeats. An English translator chimes in. She's asking if you need anything. Tell her I'm all right, I say. Tuk la, mat la bia, tink tuk, she continues. Clearly confused, I turn to the translator. She wants to know if you want cigarettes or beer, he says. Tink tuk, the nurse repeats. Or sex, he says. I said I'm fine, I reply. Cigarettes, beer, or sex. I think to myself, what is this? A hospital or a strip club? I ask with a gentle laugh. The translator smiles as the nurse stands with a blank expression. With a motion of the translator's hand, she leaves. Do you have any chewing tobacco? I ask the translator. He approaches me and asks, Skål or Copenhagen? Copenhagen, preferably, I say. You're in luck, he says, handing me a tin of long cut. I take a pinch and place it in my lower left lip, my usual spot. The tobacco is not against my gums for 10 seconds before I spit it out, coughing violently and nearly vomiting. What's the matter? Asks the translator. As I flash back to the jungle, I see myself shooting men from the log, that same tobacco taste in my mouth. I hear their screams, crystal clear. I remember how they looked, dead, and think about their weeping mothers. With a lifeless glance past the translator, I say, I can't chew tobacco anymore. So I also have an author's note. It's super brief, but I think it's relevant, so I'm going to read it. So I wrote, I wanted this creative short story to highlight the horrors of war, specifically the Vietnam War. War impacts people in a way that I cannot explain. I feel as though movies and video games oftentimes glorify war, however, there's certainly nothing pretty about it. War takes lives and ruins the simple pleasures of life for those who survive, in this case, the main character's love for chewing tobacco. I decided not to name the main character to emphasize how soldiers almost never receive the credit that they deserve for their sacrifice. Many soldiers, despite putting their lives on the line for our country, are underappreciated and sometimes even forgotten. Not knowing how familiar the reader is with the Vietnam War, I also included some information and terms below. I also translated the bits of Vietnamese used throughout the story and included some relevant pictures. But I hope my story was enjoyable and thought-provoking. Thank you.
Just chilling, isn't it, that end? And then, you know, too, my mother raised me to be a lover, not a fighter, yet there I stood in Vietnam fighting someone else's war. And I love the part, too, where he's convincing himself, you know, they're targets, I tell myself, they're just targets. So many great things in that story, Brennan. Thank you so much. I wanted to tell you that in the very front of the this front table, we have the hot chocolate Hershey Kisses, but more importantly, we also have an open mic list if you feel so inclined to share one piece of your own work. That could be a poem or a short story and a little essay, any piece of writing, science writing, maybe. But it brings me joy to welcome our next reader, Allie Hastings. She manages to both master dialogue and narration in her short story. Allie is one of our Writing Center peer tutors as well. She's a sophomore English major. And Margot, our professional writing tutor, Margot Steiner, wrote about the piece, "This is a beautiful and lyrical homage to childhood, growing up, and the bonds that, despite pulling in different directions, still have the power to bind you back together." I really liked this story, which is not important, and thought that it was well written. If you knew Margot, that's her humor. Casey Rowland, here in the audience, one of our longtime and best professional writing tutors, it wrote great character development with an exclamation point. There was a clear mood and tone created throughout, and the writing was crisp and clear. Please help me in welcoming Allie to read her story.
Hi everyone, I'm Allie. Thank you, Casey, and thank you for having me today. My story is called The Orbit of Three. At 5:14 p.m. on the 8th of June, the interstate highway is illuminated in red, drivers anxious to get home on a Friday evening. Most of the people in these cars fixate on the traffic up ahead, mindlessly humming along to an overplayed tune on the radio. Some angrily type new directions into Google Maps, looking for a route or exit ramp that'll shave 5 minutes off their commute. Almost all of these individuals remain oblivious to the solar eclipse hovering above in the sky. No one on the news hypes up astrological events anymore, but even if they did, it wouldn't change the fact they're difficult to see. Simply observing a solar eclipse is nearly impossible, especially when the light of a summer sun relentlessly obscures one's vision. 42-year-old Liz Henderson doesn't consider this as she approaches the bench on Park Hill, which overlooks the interstate highway. She glances at the sky for a brief moment, then stares at the tiny bench like it's a sanctuary, a place where sweet nostalgia can run memories through her exhausted mind. As far as she's concerned, it's the same one from her childhood, the same spot she and her siblings would rest on to watch the sunset or witness a passing shooting star. No matter that the paint is peeling and a new wooden placard claims it as someone else's, she's here and that's all that matters. It's hers now. When she sits down, pen tapping the folded open page of notebook paper with a frenzied touch, Liz squeezes her eyes shut and wills an image to pop into her head. It could be anything. She could shape a narrative out of her siblings' summer extravaganzas, talk about how they used to camp under these very stars at night, and map the constellations by hand. But all that sitting on the bench makes Liz realize is how utterly blank and uncreative the canvas of her imagination is. Cursing, she taps the screen on her phone to check the time. There's a missed phone call from David, apologizing for the inevitable delay. Nothing from Amy, which means she's on the way, diligently keeping her eyes on the road. Shielding her eyes from the glare of light, Liz risked a second glance upwards, hoping to see the faint outline of a circle, some indication that the moon is there. Black dots start to appear in her periphery when she blinks. She remembers how her sister used to say that the sun is so bright because it's all of the colors mixed together. Liz lets her hand drop and gives up trying before all the wrong colors swim in her retinas. Another curse slips out involuntarily as she thinks, they have glasses for this sort of thing, and I forgot. Deep down, though, she isn't disappointed. She knows the moon is there. All of the major science websites said it would be in alignment with the sun and Earth today. A memory suddenly tugs at her heartstrings of a night that occurred when she was just 13. It plays through her thoughts as seamlessly as a picture developing from a Polaroid, transitions with the ease of a film cutting to a scene set against the backdrop of a crystal clear evening. A meteor shower was scheduled to occur, and David had secured the bench on Park Hill as their vantage point. While they waited for the sky to darken and the clouds to give way to the universe beyond, Liz began scribbling in her notebook with intense passion. "What are you writing?" Amy had asked, peering over the top of her biology flashcards. She was a junior and straight-A student preparing for the spring AP exam. "I just had an idea for a story." "Is it for school?" David interjected, head lost in a cloud of numbers and financial stats. He was going to be a top-end executive for some high and mighty business someday. Everyone knew it. The world was too small for his ideas. "No," Liz replied, thinking he should know better. "I'm going to write a story about how the three of us differ but complement each other. How we're like the Earth, Sun, and Moon. We're different bodies of the solar system and have different purposes to fulfill, yet no matter what, we'll always be there for each other." "A triple threat of powers, I like it," Amy smiled, always at the ready to feed her younger sister's inquisitive brain with words of encouragement. "Have you thought of a title?" Liz exhaled a breath of pride, happy that one of the people she looked up to shared her feelings of excitement. "Yeah, The Orbit of Three." David paused, trying to analyze his baby sister's imagination in some decipherable way that made sense to him. He carried dreams that reached far beyond the scope of fiction, but at that moment, the evening sky stretched wide with 1,000 spectacles of light, 1,000 tiny miracles. For that moment in time and space, he gave into the boundless beauty of the world, sparing himself a minute to indulge Liz in her newfound creation. "Okay, so if I were to make a hypothetical guess, I'd say that I'm the Earth, Amy's the sun, and you're the moon?" "Yeah," Liz nodded enthusiastically, fingertips grazing the early pencil sketches that dotted the very first pages of her leather-bound notebook. David clasped his hands together, pleased with this correct deduction. Suddenly, a random fact that he gathered once from a space book as a young boy quickly landed at the forefront of his photographic memory. "Did you know that 1,000,000 Earths could fit inside the sun?" A second of silence passed, and then Amy teased, "Guess that means I'm 1,000,000 times brighter than you," rendering David speechless. Liz burst into a fit of uncontrollable, infectious laughter, to which her siblings both followed suit. It was the kind of laughter so big and so raw that it left you breathless and with a smile so tight but worth the ache. If anyone happened to be walking by Park Hill at that moment, they would have observed three siblings, overcome with joy and a state of wild amusement, sitting together on a park bench. They would have witnessed firsthand the fantastical qualities of childhood that keep young minds sheltered in a cocoon of innocence, enchantment, and exhilaration. The echoes of laughter fade in Liz's mind as the squeal and crunch of tires and gravel sound from the parking lot behind the hill. As if awoken from a trance, Liz startles but recovers quickly, closing her notebook on the page that lies in wait. The headlights of Amy's silver Honda Accord blink out as the engine whirs to a halt, and Liz turns to greet her sister warmly. "Hey, thanks for coming." "Of course, wouldn't miss it for the world," Amy replies, her voice as light as ever. The newly formed lines on her forehead and the graying hairs that frame her soft golden curls tell a different story, though. As she shuffles up the hill in her scrubs uniform, holding onto an overstuffed bag in one hand and a stack of papers in the other, Liz smiles sadly. Her sister's selflessness has proven time and time again that her spirit will never waver. The inner threads of optimism that blossom in her heart will always stifle the darker forces that lurk beneath the surface. She joins Liz on the bench, shoving the medical paperwork into her bag, and sits on the right side like she used to. "Can you see anything?" "Not really," Liz replies, ashamed at how little she prepared for this special day and their meeting. "I should have bought those glasses we used to get as kids. You know, the plastic ones with the cool design?" "Yeah," Amy smiles, and laugh wrinkles crease either side of her mouth. "David used to get the best discounts on them since he worked at that science craft store." "Right, he should be here soon," Liz says, clicking the home screen button on her phone out of habit. "He left a voicemail message about getting holed up in some meeting." "What's new?" Amy says, and the two share a knowing glance that needs no deciphering. It is a look they've mastered since the ages of 8 and 12, respectively. an expressive half eye roll, half glimmering smirk of unquestioned awe that conveys their feelings towards their brother's talented work ethic more accurately than any words could ever describe. Liz uncrosses her legs, slightly shifting the notebook's position on her left thigh. Though brief, Amy takes note of the motion, and her gaze trails down to the pocket-sized leather square and ballpoint pen. Are you writing something? A new mystery? I wish, Liz says, with more than a hint of defeat in her voice. I was hoping that Eclipse today would give me some inspiration, but it just makes me think of the past. I'm sure you'll think of something. You've written incredible stories. Liz smiles out of appreciation for the comment, even though her heart feels miles away from anything close to pure contentment. It's just, this is the worst case of writer's block that I've ever experienced, Amy. I felt so confident when I was outlining drafts for my novels that got published in my early 20s and 30s. That spark of motivation is burning out, and I don't know why. Liz runs a hand through her dark auburn hair, exasperation tickling her nerves. My ideas are skating on thin ice these days. Well, I wouldn't get too worked up about it. You sound enough just like a writer when you speak. A laugh escapes Liz's throat, an unexpected bubble of surprise that warms her to the core. The early evening glow of the summer sun enhances the color on Amy's face, brings out the corn blue specks in her eyes and the natural blush on her cheeks. If she were a stranger, Liz would never suspect that a person so beautiful and radiant could have been cursed with a cancerous tumor. The fleeting period of complacency fades, and Liz leans forward, gripping the side of the bench to keep the waves of anger at bay. How have the treatments been? And just like that, the energy in the air has changed. Amy releases a breath, almost surprised at the turn in conversation. Her gaze shifts to the rushing chaos of the cars below to soak in the simplicity of rush hour traffic. It's calming to look at somehow from way up high, in a place removed from all that noise and all that light, almost peaceful. They've been okay. The initial side effects of radiation are sometimes a pain, especially feelings of nausea. But I'm working less hours, so I get to be around for the kids more. And you're resting too, I hope, right? Yes, Amy concedes, letting a crack of her exterior give way to the exhaustion that lies within. I try to take naps when I can. Good, Liz says, scuffing the toe of her shoe with the dusting of dirt. I'm going to hold you to that. An interlude of silence ensues as the two women sit in differing states of thoughtful contemplation. When Liz hears the rev of a car engine pulling into the parking lot a moment later, she breathes a small sigh of relief, and Amy turns, grateful to have the spotlight of attention directed somewhere else. David's late arrival is like a blessing in disguise, the perfect segue to safer topics of discussion. He hustles out of the black minivan wearing only a shirt and tie with a light jacket, no business suit on Fridays. A breeze tussles his comb-backed hair, letting a few strands fly free away from their perfectly prearranged positions. Despite donning a more casual appearance, an overall aura of professionalism still lingers over his presence. Sorry I couldn't make it sooner. Did you get my message? Yeah, no worries, Liz says as her brother takes his place beside Amy. How is work? Fine, busy, but in a good way. I'm going on more trips now. I was recently bumped up to the senior managerial level. That's great, Liz and Amy respond simultaneously, and the smiles come naturally. The untouched lines in her notebook suddenly feel to Liz like a pressing task that needs to be taken care of immediately. David accepts his sister's praise, and then it's his turn to ask questions. First to Amy. How is your health? What are the symptoms like, and how often do they occur? Would you let me know if I can do anything to help? Then Liz. What are you working on now? How is the new apartment? Have you been seeing anyone recently? Once the questions are out of the way, and he feels caught up on everything of importance, David finally looks out to the horizon line and up to the sky, squinting against the glare. It's nice to see this view again, but I do have to leave soon, unfortunately. He checks the time on his phone, and his leg instinctively begins to bob up and down, an early signifier of impatience. Family's waiting on dinner. Amy nods in understanding, while Liz intuitively thinks, he's always on to the next thing. It's always go, go, go. He can never sit still. But despite these thoughts, which in truth do reflect a character flaw in David, a twinge of guilt rises in her stomach. Liz knows that her siblings did not have to meet her here at this specific spot in time just to acknowledge the unseeable solar eclipse in the sky. The unified presence is a gift in and of itself, a time warped back into the carefree summer evenings of their childhood. I've missed this place, Amy says softly, unexpectedly, like a welcome sliver of wind on a warm day. Do you remember when we would camp out here under the stars? Her voice drips with sentiment. We used to come all the time. Yeah, a boyish grin lights up David's face. Images of constellation charts and telescopes and kerosene lanterns flash through his mind. He sees himself bent over a map of the solar system, hears the rustling of paper as Amy flips over her flashcards, and the scratch of a pen as Liv furtively scribbles into her notebook. For the first time since arriving to Park Hill, David stretches out his legs and relaxes into the wooden embrace of the bench. For a second, he appears at peace with the present by reflecting on their shared past, unburdened by the responsibilities and events that await him in the near future. I'm glad you both came, Liz states quietly, before the serenity of the moment is broken and the tides of gravity pull them toward their own separate realities once again. We should come back for the next eclipse. She expects there to be hesitation on David's end, maybe a request from Amy that someone bring glasses next time. But they both smile, nodding their heads in silent agreement, and the moon begins its journey onward. Thank you.
Couldn't you feel the energy of the air change when she read that, when the air was charged with the sisters when they're sitting together? My goodness. Allie does such a great job of navigating between the different characters, these three characters, and giving them all a voice. Great job. Next, we're inviting Megan Hemingway, who I just had the beautiful pleasure of meeting, a first-year student communication major with a creative writing minor. So we're very excited to have her. Megan's story illustrates communal loss at a Catholic funeral, but she never preaches to her readers. Her words and experience are unrushed. Professional writer and professional writing tutor, Juliana Thibodeau in the back, wrote beautifully written and filled with detail. Nice tension and emotionally honest. It captured a young adult's coming-of-age experience quite well. Please join me in welcoming Megan.
Thank you for having me. This is a memoir piece that I just wrote this semester for my Intro to Creative Writing class. Yeah. On the morning of my uncle's funeral, I couldn't figure out what to wear. Gray clouds crowded the January sky, and their color reflected the dirty snow that crusted the ground. The crackle of the radiators around my house signaled the frigid temperature outside, so I chose a pair of black tights and hoped that a gray sweater would have a near enough semblance to morning black. I climbed downstairs in my heels and was greeted by my family gathered in the kitchen. I noticed my dad first, poised like a somber statue in the corner, nearly swallowed up by his suit jacket and shiny dress shoes. My brother proved to be his complete opposite, his broad lumberjack frame bursting out of a sophisticated vest and suspenders. Despite the morbid occasion, I grinned at the jaunty scally cap that rested on my brother's head, and we quietly joked about whether Dad should don a matching one. Soon after, my mother checked the time impatiently, and my sister became restless, so we quickly piled into the car, headed for the church. St. Patrick's Parish is a sprawling white behemoth, seeming tall enough then to graze the dense cloudy sky. When we arrived, not a soul lingered nearby besides the various whitewashed statues of religious figures that I couldn't help but probe, as if I was waiting for them to suddenly come alive. It only became clear that the place wasn't entirely deserted when we slipped through the grand double doors, as my aunts appeared instantly, bustling about with programs flying from their hands and orders already on their lips. It struck me then just how formal everyone appeared. The last occasion my family looked so elegant for was my eldest brother's wedding, which felt starkly different from the event I found myself attending then. The heightened decorum of the day, mixed with the solemn and unfamiliar atmosphere of the church, left me feeling dizzy. So I watched with distant curiosity as my dad and his sisters approached a grand marble bowl hidden in the wall that was filled with glimmering water. They crossed themselves as if they had done it as often as they brushed their teeth. My career as a Catholic had ended abruptly when I was 9, so the gesture felt as unfamiliar to me as a stranger on the sidewalk. "Do I need to do that?" I whispered to my mom, a fellowing, non-practicing Catholic. "No, you haven't been confirmed," she replied reassuringly, steering me away from the vessel, though my eyes lingered on it with a peculiar fascination. Up ahead, we arrived in the dim arcade that led to the ornate sanctuary. Just a peek inside revealed the elegantly detailed archways and shiny wood paneling that surrounded the principal attraction, Jesus himself, perched sacredly on a golden cross that soared down from the ceiling. I was immediately drawn in by the architecture, but my Aunt Charlene stationed me right outside the doors, along with her daughter and my cousin Kayla, whose demeanor seemed just as hesitant as mine. We were tasked with handing out thick, creamy white programs with our uncle's face on them. "This is kind of weird," I mumbled, gazing down at the stack of papers in my hands. "I know," Kayla agreed. "Have you seen Nana and Papa yet?" I shook my head. But soon enough, my 75-year-old black-clad grandparents appeared in the arcade, my aunts Charlene and Rita scurrying behind them, and each person held an object, whether it was food or flowers, or the mysterious pine wood box in my Nana's hands. "What's in the box?" I whispered to Kayla. "Uncle Bobby's ashes," she replied seriously, and suddenly the protective grip my grandmother had on the box made my chest tighten painfully. The next hour passed sluggishly as Nana and Papa entered the sanctuary and took seats in the very first pew on the right. Attendees streamed in every few minutes then, many of them I knew vaguely, but some I didn't. "I'm John Paul's daughter," I learned to say automatically when a wrinkled face eyed me kindly, struggling to admit that they had absolutely no idea who I was. At my proclamation, they immediately sighed in relief and exclaimed that the last time they saw me, I was just learning to walk. I would force a laugh and hand them a program, sneaking looks to Kayla, who experienced the same conflict on her side of the doorway. Even worse, though, was when we were faced with a shiny-eyed guest who took our hands in theirs and said, "I'm so sorry for your loss." We mumbled thank yous and niceties, but what was really on the tips of our tongues was a grand confession, certainly not meant for a funeral. I never knew him. And our unfortunate circumstances grew more dire when my mom suddenly revealed where Kayla and I were expected to sit for the duration of the ceremony. "Your grandparents are very upset. They need you to support them," Mom insisted, looking pointedly at the first pew where the gauzy white hair and shorter bald head of my grandparents bobbed. Kayla and I shared a desperate look, both imagining the heart-wrenching tears and cries that we wouldn't be able to escape. Why us, I argued, internally weighing my fear of grief against my guilt at avoiding my mourning grandparents. We're the youngest grandchildren. Why can't someone older do it? Mine and Kayla's protests don't last very long, though, once my dad's harsh gaze demands, "You'll do it and you'll like it." My father would always remain loyal to his family, especially his parents, and sometimes that meant sacrificing your comfort for what was morally right. So Kayla and I dragged our feet down the seemingly endless aisle and squeezed ourselves between Nana and Papa, me on one end and Kayla in between the two. Nana looked the most frail I had ever seen her, and Papa the most solemn. I noticed their old age more suddenly and strikingly than ever before, and I found it hard to love. The ceremony began soon after. I didn't pay much attention during the 2 hours, maybe due to boredom or disconnection to the deceased, or simply because there was plenty to distract myself with, whether it be the glittering stained glass windows around me or the poster boards on the pulpit filled with pictures of Uncle Bobby. He appeared happy in those photos, just another Hemingway son with a thick beard and sparkly brown eyes, dressed in ridiculous short shorts and neon t-shirts straight out of the 1980s. Of course, those poster boards certainly didn't tell the story I knew. They didn't show his rampant alcoholism and addiction, his isolation in Tennessee, or his slow decline into cirrhosis that left my grandparents with 2 sons gone too soon. I had accumulated these facts over time, told to me in bitterness and disappointment, but right at that moment, sitting in St. Patrick's, they didn't align with what I was shown. The caring brother my aunt described and the rambunctious child my grandmother reminisced about was not the flighty, dangerous man I had been warned about. All of this led me to wonder which side of him I should believe in, or rather, who really was my Uncle Bobby. Could he be forgiven? On the day of the funeral, I certainly believed so. As the saying goes, of the dead say nothing but good. So somehow, despite my position as a near outsider to this funeral, I found myself wrapped in the same atmosphere of loss and memory. The ceremony closed quietly, and the funeral party returned to the arcade to prepare for the burial a few blocks away. With the sincere words of the priest still ringing in everyone's ears, a domino effect suddenly took place. Across the room, my grandparents began to cry, consoled by my aunts who began to wipe at their own eyes. My dad, standing before me, abruptly choked out his own sobs, and the sight sent my eldest brother and his wife into tears. Soon enough, my sister quietly swiped tears away, and my finely dressed brother, with the silly hat still on his head, sniffled. It only seemed natural then that I burst out into tears. For a few minutes, we all cried, some with genuine grief and others from the effects of it. Regardless of which, the catharsis was real, and within a short time, we were smiling at our own outburst, recovering enough for the next and final step. The burial is the starkest memory I have of Uncle Bobby's funeral. I was tightly wrapped in a black pea coat, the perfect image of a funeral mourner. My immediate family crunched through the snow on the cemetery grounds, shivering in the winter wind as we reached Uncle Bobby's plot. He was set to be buried beside his brother, who died decades ago, though the pain was still apparent in my grandparents' eyes. The priest was still there, and he consoled us with a few words, treating my feeble Nana with such care I couldn't help but be grateful to him. The hole was already dug, so we all watched in near silence as Nana placed that sacred wood box on the ground and threw a handful of dirt over it like I had only ever seen in movies. Tears threatened to spill again, but I held them in, knowing the grief that I was faced with was nearly past. And when I studied the faces around me, my parents and siblings, aunts and uncles, in them I saw exactly what I was feeling. It occurred to me then that nobody felt that pain more than my grandparents. And even now, 3 years after the funeral, I still feel so much sorrow for all they've suffered through and respect for the strength they've shown. In my 18 years, I have never seen grief so intimately as I did on that freezing January day. Although I didn't quite experience it myself, I felt its heavy, oppressive presence, and I saw the heart-wrenching effect it had and continues to have on the people I love most. This knowledge frightens me for a future in which I will know grief, but also relieves me, because I know it's possible to grow from it. In terms of my uncle, I still don't know how to remember him, but I've found that it's a much easier existence, finding comfort in the good than nitpicking the bad. Since that day, I have a closer relationship with loss, and even better, a closer relationship with my family, so that we may mourn together in the future whenever grief comes back again. Thank you.
What a self-aware and honest narrator we got to meet in such a personal piece. Thank you so much for sharing, Megan. If you're wondering, since it's about 4:45, if you should sneak out now with a cookie and a cup of hot cocoa and leave for the night, I'll let you know we just have 2 more readings by our last 2 finalists who could make it tonight. For the 2 finalists who could not make it, we have their work right in front at this front table with the hot chocolate Hershey Kisses. Maybe I mentioned they're delicious. Please eat them, so don't eat them all tomorrow and Friday. And then the sign-up sheet for the open mic in case anyone wants to stay a little after 5. But our next reader is our finalist and also a Writing Center peer tutor in the spring. George Rosatone is a sophomore English creative writing major. And regarding his story, it was defined very differently by different readers. Some called it a thriller, a horror story, and then some defined it as a supernatural sci-fi story. So I think it's very exciting. I found that it captivates you with the very first sentence. Brian, one of our professional writing tutors, Vlasic, wrote wonderfully evocative imagery. Dan Graham, another professional writing tutor who is also our cameraman this evening, thank you Dan, wrote Leshy is the work of a more experienced and well-read writer. And then Dan Kalman, who couldn't be with us tonight, but who is a Writing Center peer tutor and also a member of our Tutoring and Writing Center Executive Board, wrote Imaginative and Shockingly Vivid. Please join me in welcoming George.
That's good, y'all. Can you hear me?
No.
Is that okay?
I'm on it.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I apologize, I woke up with a bit of a fever this morning, so if I sound a little off, that's why. But I hear it adds to this, so we'll see how that goes. This is Leshy. We miss playing in the woods. As children, we would run from our parents, our chores, our village, and just immerse ourselves in this fantasy world conjured up from our own naive imaginations. A world where pain wasn't real, being dead was just pretend, and hunger was outmatched by the hope of a warm dinner back home at the end of the day. Hours went by in this world, from noon till sundown. Wars were fought, prisoners were taken, monsters slain, all from naught but sticks and stones. We hid in the same dark bushes and trees that terrify us now. We ran down the same paths that now remain overgrown and untraveled. We embraced the same woodland noises that now keep us up at night. When we were children, there was no creature. The elders have taken to calling him Leshy, after some sort of forest demon from the old monster books. No one has seen him entirely, and even those that claim to catch a glimpse are met with immediate critique and sometimes punishment. That being said, we are all well aware that it exists, that it's watching. We are watching back, or at least we like to tell ourselves such. Truth be told, we don't know where to look, if we can even see it at all. At times, the trees may shift when there is no wind, a branch may crack, a family dog might be thrown against a rock with enough force to break its neck on impact, at which point the entire village can be found standing shoulder to shoulder, eyes wide, mouths open, lost. As horrible as losing our beloved pets was at first, it is safe to assume that we all consider them the lucky ones. See, our dogs were brave. At the sound of a cracking branch or the sight of an 8-foot shadow in the woodline, they would go charging right on in, without a sense of fear in the world. Maybe the fact that they never came back is what fuels our fear so much. It wasn't long afterwards that people started going into the woods as well. A few at least. A small band of the village's most courageous drunkards, led by none other than the gluttonous brute, Portsmouth Chevet.
kicked down the very door that had for so long muffled their childish antics, and stormed right on into the darkness. This was surprising, to say the least, as drinking the night away seemed to be a frequent habit for every man in the village. Not long after the creature's presence became known, every man who we came to for protection could be found in the village brewery, often laughing, pranking each other, singing, anything to take their minds off the looming realization that whatever was haunting the village had become their responsibility. However, on this night, perhaps the men had grown tired of the anxiety brought on by the creature, or perhaps tired of no longer embodying the men their wives and children had once seen them as. Chevet demanded the creature present its head, lest the drunken warrior have to take it by force. We assume it was the creature's reply, or perhaps lack of one, that inflamed the first candle of madness in Chevet's mind. The brute had tensed, a fire rose in his eyes, his skin nearly blood red, moments away from breaking his own teeth against each other. The drunken fool hollered into the trees of pure rage, demanding that his followers climb every tree, turn every rock, and dig every hole until his ghastly tormentor presents itself. It was at this point that not much could be seen or heard from the group besides the bobbing of torchlights and occasional screaming of the intoxicated commander. Search, men, search! Collect every pebble, pull every strain of bush until our cowardly demon presents itself. The wives of these drunken men cried from the edge of the village, begging that their childish husbands come home for the night. Children screamed for their fathers, who were too full of anger and false courage to care. Everything went silent when a black cloud moved across the sky, circling but then perching above the tree line to watch the men below. Crows. These birds did not squawk, did not blink, did not even so much as twitch their heads in curiosity. They simply stared, meeting the gaze of every man, including that of Chevet's. This event is what is believed to have lit the second candle in the brooding man's mind. From our village, we could only see the shaking of the trees as Chevet came after the winged creatures, with some of the smaller trees completely falling over. They are watching, screamed the madmen, pulsating, eyes bulging with both wrath and excitement at the realization that they had both noticed, or that they had been noticed. They are the eyes of the beast. Without any else so much as resembling the voice of reason, the men were inclined to believe the man, growing just as angry in their pursuit. With the accuracy one would expect of an intoxicated farmer, the men swung at the birds, stumbling around in the ever-thickening dark cloud of feathers. The men, no doubtedly seeing double and losing coordination, threw their fists into the air with all the force they could muster. They threw themselves at the birds, often catching naught but feathers and occasionally each other. Eventually, one such man, whether in a fit of drunken creativity or sober intelligence, picked up a rock and hurled it into the air, striking down and claiming the first crow of the night. "Good work, Ivan!" Chevet screamed for the first time without a hint of anger in his voice. "Once we take Leshy's head, the next round is on me, my friend." The birds fell silent. Then they dropped from the sky one by one. The men were still, unsure of what had just happened. However, it did not take long for Chevet to consider this a victory. A light chuckle ascending to his screaming laughter. This time around, his followers did not join him, instead staring in disbelief at piles of crows that had collected upon the ground. There were a dozen or so men, and for each man, at least 3 mounds of dead crows almost ritualistically placed on top of each other. The men pondered the scene, perhaps in a moment of fear and sobriety, with their mouths gaping and their eyes shifting ever so slightly from mount to mount. Their light tunics, somewhat torn from the beaks of the crows, draped on their bodies in the same way they draped themselves over in exhaustion and fear. "What is wrong with you?" screamed Chevet. "Don't you see we have won? Don't you see we have murdered his scouts? That we are frightening he who has tormented us for so long?" None of the men so much as glanced at Chevet. Instead, their widening eyes fixated on an 8-foot-tall figure that had been observing them from deeper in the wood. It stood humanoid in shape, but nowhere near resembling the biological structure of an actual man. Though cast in shadow, the men could clearly see it had limbs of bone intertwined with bits of bark, leaf, and fur. At first, this fur appeared to be unknown. However, as their eyes fixated on their observer, they soon realized that the fur came in patches of different colors, thickness, and length. This was dog's fur. More specifically, the exact breeds of dog that had once chased into the wood, never to return. It was very clear that the creature followed no symmetrical structure, no proper composition in the slightest. Instead, it seemed to have been cobbled together from sticks and bone, disproportionate in almost every aspect. The twigs and bones, strung together by its own vein-like vines, glistened in the moonlight. It loomed over them, hunched due to either its poor framework or its fascination with the men who had awoken it. It made no noise, no attempt to speak or communicate, besides the occasional clink of bones from a light breeze. The few who found their courage to crane their heads and lock eyes with the creature found that he did not have a head, rather a skull, a dog's skull. It was large, containing enough strength and teeth to easily crush a man in a single bite. The only man that owned a dog this large, of course, was Chevet. It was this very realization that struck the third and final candle. Frozen, pale, the fire in Chevet's eyes had extinguished into a wide, cold circle, and the once glowing red face had now been painted white in fear. His men, however, still drunk on booze and rage, had finally found the courage to stand up to the beast as Chevet demanded. War cries could be heard as the men propped themselves up, pumping their chests and taunting the beast. The morale, spreading like a rapid plague through the men, brought each and every one of them out of their periodic trance. In a fit of confidence, the men all charged straight for the tormentor, swinging fists, branches, rocks, anything that was sure to do some damage. The frenzy lasted only for a couple of moments as the men unsuccessfully tried their hardest to chip away at the motionless beast, who had yet to move or break eye contact with the broken Chevet. No matter how hard it hit, how forceful a pull, not a single twig, vine, or bone so much as detached from the creature's body. The men smashed, pounded, sliced, but without a hint of success. Without a moment's notice, the wood itself seemed to descend upon the men. The moonlight grew dim as the trees closed in, the torchlights now useless against the invading darkness, branches extending and contorting in ways thought unimaginable by man, began to wrap themselves around some of the men, choking and dragging them deeper into the dark wilderness. These hooks and twig-like hands pulled, unbreakable, as if crafted from the very materials that had protected the creature from the men's many advances. Crows, soaring silently through the black sky, plunged their beaks through eye sockets, with the luckier of the few dying instantly from the puncture. Whips made of vine and thorn descended from the trees, slashing the throats of the men that were left. The torches carried by some of the men fell to the ground, inflaming the very mounds of crows that had once grabbed so much of their attention. This inferno spread across the dead grass and trees, the smoke and flame encompassing the very last of the men who had, unfortunately for them, survived for this long. All except Chevet. Chevet remained in his state of shock, a mere few feet away from the demon, who had also stood still during the massacre. Neither seemed concerned with the growing wildfire that was closing in. Instead, they locked eyes, either entranced with one another, or perhaps by some alternate otherworldly connection, until all that could be seen on the woodline was the rising smoke and bright orange glow of the man-made inferno. None dared to so much as even call out to the man.
Thank you for coming. Good to be here. Great. I think we might have to classify it as horror. I got chills 4 times. Woo! That dog fur, the different patches of dog fur is going to be in my nightmares tonight, so thank you, George. Great writing. That's what great writing can do. The next finalist is Megan Dinglestead, who is actually one of our Writing Center peer tutors as well. I swear I didn't judge this thing. I would be too biased, so I didn't choose all these people. Megan is a sophomore hospitality management major, and her work here is an analytical essay. Megan's work analyzes gender portrayals in Beauty and the Beast, a film with a stronger female lead than other Disney films, such as Cinderella. Megan even dissects the Teapot song, Tale as Old as Time. One of our professional writing tutors and a writer as well, Jessica Demetra Solantos, wrote, "Well written and argued. Megan has a clear thesis, supporting evidence, and a solid analysis." And then Casey Rowland and Margot Steiner, 2 professional writing tutors of ours, they both exclaimed, "Well written," with exclamation points. Please welcome Megan.
Hi, my name's Megan. Alright, I'm just gonna start. So my paper is called Beauty and the Beast, Gender Stereotypes Present in Disney Films. And then for the sake of time and my own comfort, I took out just like the individual analysis that I did. So we're just going to be talking about like the movie as a whole. So society assigns certain ideals to a person based on their gender, which are upheld in all that they do in life. This is true in the media and fictional text as well. Men and women are expected to look and act in a certain way based on their gender. The infamous Disney princess movies follow these gender ideologies quite closely, as both the appearances of the characters and the plot of the movie revolves around specific gender stereotypes. Disney has offered audiences stories of princesses and princes, heroes and heroines, victims and villains. Gender plays a central role in these narratives. Scholars have critiqued the various ways in which Disney film depicts masculinity and femininity. The 1991 film Beauty and the Beast is one of these films that specifically illustrates different male and female characteristics through the main characters, Belle and the Beast. Disney's Beauty and the Beast portrays the stereotypical gender characteristics through the characters, the plot, and specific scenes and songs. The interactions between Belle and the Beast make the gendered stereotypes in Beauty and the Beast more prominent. One scene in particular stands out in regard to the conventional actions of men and women. Belle tries to escape from the Beast castle after he loses his temper with her. While in the woods, Belle becomes surrounded by a menacing pack of wolves. The Beast appears just in time and fights the pack off, saving Belle's life. Back at the castle, Belle tends to his wounded arm and thanks him for saving her life, which is the first moment they have a genuine connection. According to Ott and Mack, mainstream media representations of men and masculinity are often marked by strength and activity. Images of women, on the other hand, tend to emphasize passiveness and weakness. This active-passive binary suggests that men are strong and women are weak. In the instance with the wolves, the Beast appears to be strong since he physically saved Belle's life in her moment of weakness. This scenario also supports the idea that women are nurturing and act as caretakers to others, particularly men, allowing the Beauty and the Beast characters to conform to gender binaries even more. The infamous song, titled after the movie, reveals more gender stereotypes. Beauty and the Beast is sung by Mrs. Potts, the lively teapot, when Belle and the Beast dance and are evidently falling in love. The constant mention of Beauty and the Beast throughout the song suggests that she essentially is serenading the couple with their love story. More significant, though, is the repetition of the phrase, tale as old as time, which suggests that a love story like this has happened frequently and seemingly will continue to do so. Therefore, the depiction of masculinity and femininity in Beauty and the Beast is not an uncommon occurrence, so gender stereotypes are certainly present in this movie. Disney films specifically have been shown to portray some stereotypical depiction of gender. A study was conducted to analyze Disney characters' gender portrayals to reveal the presence of these stereotypes by studying characteristics that are traditionally associated with either men or women. In films including Beauty and the Beast, masculine characteristics found in the prince include physically strong, assertive, unemotional, inspires fear, and physically attractive, while feminine characteristics included shows emotion, affectionate, nurturing, sensitive, physically attractive, and a victim. Belle and the Beast both possess all of these characteristics through the film, so it can be concluded that gender stereotypes really are present in Beauty and the Beast. The characteristics and actions of Belle and the Beast, as well as characters like Gaston in Beauty and the Beast, depict the stereotypical gender roles present in this Disney film. Belle appears and acts like a woman is expected, beautiful, nurturing, and sensitive. The Beast and Gaston are both strong, tough, and assertive, characteristics attributed to men. The scenes and songs throughout the movie show the interactions between the two genders and make the stereotypes appear more prominent. Therefore, Beauty and the Beast is a film that demonstrates stereotypical gender characteristics and actions, matching the gender ideals in society. Thank you.
Oh man, it's an ad on YouTube. I was gonna try to play Tale as Old as Time for you all, because that's what this is, tales. Us storytelling, sharing words. That's why we ended with your piece, Megan. Tale as Old as Time. I think it's really fitting that we're here in the basement of the library. A lot of readings happen down here. This is our first ever Writing Center reading. There'll be many more. For you watching at home on your Writing Center Endicott YouTube channel, I'm Casey Fallon. There'll be more Writing Center readings in the future. Thank you all for coming and supporting